In the 2022 National Organic Research Agenda report, organic farmers shared a common concern about the lack of information available for integrated crop and livestock systems. The report also showed that the number one source of information for organic farmers is other farmers. To address this need, OFRF has developed a suite of resources on crop-livestock integration, informed by interviews with highly experienced organic producers across the U.S. whose farming operations have benefited from integrated crop and livestock production. The interviews, farmer profiles, and more are available for free on our website at ofrf.org. This video features John Bitter, production manager and co-owner of Frog Song Organics. Frog Song is a diversified organic farm producing vegetables, orchard crops, herbs, flowers, pork, and eggs. Operating on 62 acres in North Florida, Frog Song employs about 30 full-time workers, supplies direct and wholesale markets in several nearby cities, and runs an online customizable CSA program. In this video, John talks about integration of crop and animal production systems at this thriving organic farm.
I'm John Bitter, the production manager, co-owner of Frog Song Organics. With animal integration, the primary reason we do it is to turn liability into a resource. And the pigs help us turn over the sweet potato plantings, and they remove the pieces that are left after the harvest. If we don't do that, then the weevil just gets out of control. If you let it fester, it'll ruin all your inventory. It'll ruin all your fields, because a little bug can just like get up and fly about probably a mile or so. It depends on how the wind's blowing, but it's very mobile. And so as sweet potato growers, if we were non-organic, we'd probably just go out and spray Roundup on it and try to kill all the vines that came back up. You could probably do like a soil fumigant too. And those are just things that we don't want to ever take the risk of putting out there. We don't trust the literature on it. We don't trust the lobbying that went behind it. So that's why we do what we do. We decide that the pigs are actually the best way to plow over the land without using a lot of diesel. And so the pigs will take sweet potato scraps and turn it into something that's it's a very high value product, organic bacon essentially, but better than organic. It's actually pasture raised and on organic pasture. And then the chickens here too, they're a big part of how we manage the orchards. So we'll establish little orchards. We'll maintain orchards. They eat a lot of worms. They eat a lot of curculio. We hope that's like the worst pest that we have in the area for plums and peaches and nectarines and stuff. So the curculio is probably the worst pest, and we'll get into that. But millipedes can be a pest. I see. They'll crawl up the tree and stuff. So if the chickens are actively just taking out any kind of protein that's down there below the trees, it's going to be like the best case scenario. And as you can see, we kind of concentrate their feeders there around the trees, and that definitely keeps the chickens circulating right around the base of the tree and like pecking in there for all the weeds. And they're also obviously putting the manure right there too, and they're scratching it in the soil. So it's even kind of semi-incorporated into the soil. If you think about how perfect it is, it's like, wow, okay. One of the only challenges I'll say at the end here too is I think just using it with young trees. In the young tree areas, like the small little saplings, like the first year or two, we do like exclude those, or we'll put something around them. So once in a while, the chickens will just decide that they want to eat all the skin off of a young tree, or so all the I guess the young bark, the stuff that peels right off. And so that's probably the only big challenge with having the chickens in there. Once the trees are about like 2 or 3 years old, they don't seem to do that, but they do pick on that first year tree once in a while for some reason. The amount of success that we get out of cover crops is actually a good validation of the system, I think. When the soil's really new, it doesn't have a lot of fertility, the cover crops will be really short. But as you saw in a lot of our pictures, a lot of our cover crops have been in pretty lush areas. Like this one right here, this one's about like 20 inches tall or so. This one was a poor area, and I think I said that earlier, was how the millet didn't come up, but you can see how sparse it is there. But what we've seen is that every year this block's actually gotten better. You should have seen it the first year. The first year we couldn't even sustain a cover crop. So now we're 3 years into this block, and I should probably take another 3-year picture in the future from now and show you how it's improved. And this block here, I mean, I remember the first year that we sowed a seed here, there was a whole bunch of puddles and incongruencies, and the fertility was all over the place, like especially down towards the bottom. Now you can see like the cover crop grows super evenly throughout the entire block, and that's due to the drainage and the nutrients management on all those. Let's see another one. That millet right there is a really nice stand. There's a lot of headed up millet in those pictures, and that's what buckwheat should look like there in terms of the millet buckwheat mix. That block we had been managing for probably 8 years to 10 years at that point of that photo, and yeah, that had its challenges too at the beginning. This one is a really clayey block, and we've had cover crops fail the first year, I think, there because there's so much clay. So this one's getting better, over the years. I would say it's twice or 3 times as good as it when it started. Still got a lot of ways to go. This is really the meat of, I think, what people want to know is how do you have vegetables and raise animals at the same time? And this is a really important part of what to talk about, because I think this is where the farm could go really wrong if you didn't acknowledge your risks. But I think the risks are simple. You don't want to get manure into the product in any way possible. Like you have to look at how does your manure transfer from your paddock to your packing shed, or from your paddock to your plantings. So we've identified a few different critical control points in our HACCP plan. And our HACCP plan is really simple, but identify the critical control points and then figure out how you're going to verify, validate that they all get met. So, big part of what you do is you engineer your field so that not only can the irrigation and the soil moisture work, but at the same time you have to think about where the manure runs after leaving a paddock. So I'd say start there as a farmer. So you're going to need to look at, which way does every drop flow as it comes down out of the sky, hits your farm. Then you need to know where your paddocks are and where you're going to raise your crops and what kind of crops you have too, because you might be able to raise all low risk crops, and that'd be fine. But food safety training is right after the water movement. So not only do you need to know which way the water runs on your property, you also need to know that everybody who's working for you has been trained on food safety protocol. And that really involves, safe handling and visiting the animal areas. So making sure the manure is off your boots, make sure you wash your hands, make sure there's no way that you can bring the contaminants back to the packing shed from any manure areas. And then when in doubt, or when you have a risk, use peracetic acid sanitizer. That's the best organic sanitizer we can find that doesn't have any kind of residue. And we use that for services, equipment, and most importantly, wash water. We do a lot of cover crops year round to support health and the soil health, and primarily for forage. Both pigs and chickens will eat all these different cover crops that we grow, even sun hemp. As long as it's real small, the pigs will graze it, and the chickens will eat it if you mow it down with any kind of mower. We'll mow it down with a zero turn, or we'll mow it down with a let's see here, usually like a still or something. That's little weed whacker is the best way to mow it down. But either or, we're planting throughout November and February with the winter mix. Would be like the 401, cocoa oats, and then wheat if we can get it. That's kind of a year-to-year thing. And then in the summertime, we'll be able to plant, buckwheat all the way through every kind of millet. And sorghum Sudan grass has been a decent one to rotate with the millet too, when we've done millet too many times in a row. And then sun hemp is a standalone. Most of our cover crops are multi-species mixes, but the sun hemp is the one that really seems to thrive on its own and like block out all the light from the competition. And so for the sun hemp, and then I also included in here, like we have crops like sweet potatoes that are pretty much half their job is to forage. They're out there providing like a cover crop throughout half the year, and then the pigs get to graze them down when they're done. We just have that little small window of opportunity where we get in there, turn over the beds, take all the gray days out of there, and leave all the scraps for the pigs. And so for a farmer, we don't even worry that much, as long as we're not losing tons of them. But we might lose 30% of a block of sweet potatoes. That's basically what we'll estimate from all the rotten ones or damaged ones out there. And it's not real loss, because obviously the pigs are going in there and gaining something off of them. So it doesn't hurt as much as if you're just farming sweet potatoes and you have to go destroy all those potatoes somehow. This is a typical rotation for us. Is we'll start off with sweet potatoes in the fall and the summer, like fall harvest, and then winter cover crops after the sweet potato are harvested. And that'll grow up for a few months, and then we'll graze it down. And underneath that cover crop will be all the sweet potatoes hiding out under there. So the pigs will be grazing basically grass on top and sweet potatoes on the bottom. So that's a really nutritious mix for them. And then after the pigs are done in there, we actually will plow up the ground, form up beds again, and then we'll plant either winter, spring, or summer vegetables, just depending on when the actual crop terminates, or when the grazing terminates. And right now we're in the middle of it, so we have pigs that have started grazing sweet potatoes in October, November, and then when the sweet potato patches get done, we have their dates scheduled at the butcher. We just know that like they have this many more sweet potatoes to go, and then within 1 month, 2 months, 3 months time, we'll get to their end of their cycle when they're done with the feed, essentially. And it gets a lot more expensive to feed them once we have all the sweet potatoes out of the ground. So we go to summer cover crops of here, this is the winter cover crop while we're still there. That's what the rye and the oats look like there. And the sweet potatoes too, it just got burned down from the frost. And then the right half of the screen actually is where they've just been dug. So we were out there, I think, seeding cover crop, and it's kind of like all the steps in the process. Then the cover crop grows up, and then the pigs here are enjoying the cover crop and the sweet potatoes as they basically plow up the dirt. With the chickens, they're under the orchard, and they also use these same kind of warm season cover crops like sorghum in this picture. and this is an establishing orchard. These trees are almost twice as big in this photo now, and it's only been about a year and a half, because the chicken fertility is really kicked in over, I think, 3.5 years, 4.5 years of managing like this. All of a sudden, after year 5 and 6, then the persimmons start to get like 12 feet tall. It's pretty amazing. We also plant these cover crops between the fruit trees so that we can plan on having the chickens graze them at the right time of the year. So like in this photo here with the stone fruit, we're anticipating the harvest is, I think this was just after the harvest, and the chickens were getting right into this, and they're basically cleaning up any of the fruit that dropped on the ground, any of the where the worms basically fester, the Herculeo, it's a weevil that gets in there. And if we can control them with the chickens a little bit, it really does help for the next year. And we've been battling that pest a lot, but the orchards that get the most chickens and are most isolated from the wilderness are actually the cleanest orchards. We do the same thing in the citrus orchard. So here's millet that we plant, Japanese millet to be specific, and we put this in the citrus grove. We'll mow this down. Some of it will go into the citrus trees, and some of it gets fed to the chickens as they graze through here. So this a lot of this area that seeds up really well, the chickens will graze that down, and at the same time they'll be spending some time under the shade of those trees where they're looking for weevils, looking for worms, and depositing all their manure at the same time. This is an example of sun hemp in the pear orchard. And so this would be a good time to graze it down by pigs if you need to at the time. So sun hemp is kind of our backup plan for our pig grazing. We'll try to have enough millet and sorghum and buckwheat available after the sweet potato crop. And if we fail at any time, then we have acres and acres of the sun hemp that would be a decent forage for them. You can only do it till the sun hemp's about, like, I'd say 20 something inches tall. Once it gets over waist high or so, then it gets too tough for them, and there's too much some kind of acid, I think, in the leaves or something. And I know the lignin content is probably really high too, but they just won't eat it after it gets too tall. So just when it's really young, it would be like a backup forage. And in this situation here, we wouldn't include the fruit trees for the pigs. We would just include that area where the sun hemp is growing. And we put the fence line right there at the base of the fruit tree bed, right where you can see it's been mowed. And these pears were just about ripe, I guess, in this picture. And then while we're grazing, we consider these aspects. So like, will the animals eat the cover crop or eat the residue of the crop? Other thing to think about is how much it costs to establish. If cover crops are really expensive to plant, like some years, sun hemp is really expensive to buy the seed. So it wouldn't be like a good primary forage. That's why I say it's our backup forage. It's better for its fertility that it adds as it gets really large and a lot of carbon into the soil, but it's not so beneficial when you graze it down when it's 20 inches tall. So it might be a pretty expensive way to make the forage versus like really cheap millet seed or even buckwheat's pretty reasonable to establish, especially like mixed in with the millet. You also have to think is this is probably most important, is does the crop fit in with the rotation? So I'll talk a little bit more about the rotation too, but we grow a lot of legume cash crops already. So if we're looking how to have a high protein legume for grazing, it's just not really a good mix with our cash crops. So if you're not doing any cash crops, then you might actually find it's better use of your money to buy some legume seeds that really make a lot more nitrogen per unit of land. Part of our livestock program has had to be reproduction. We didn't actually know we had to get into that, I guess, in the beginning. So it was always, that there was always a lot of people that had piglets, and it was available to buy piglets. But then, as you are in business for more years, you realize that sometimes the piglets aren't there when you need them to be there in your cycle. And plus, what we found too is once you start selecting for the pigs that do well at your area, then they stay pretty healthy and they still stay pretty productive. We've worked with a breed that we'll get into here with it's called the red wattle, and that's very, very important. And part of that breed is to know what the genetics are, and we bring a different sire in from a different line to live on site. And we have a few sows that rotate through the honeymoon suite, and this is where they go eventually, is to the farrowing pen. And farrowing is really important. You want a good cover crop there, you want a good spot in the farm, and we plan our farrowing around these, basically give the sow the best of what there is at that moment of the year, give her plenty of shade. And then the best thing is that the piglets, as soon as they're born, I'd say, well, not as soon as they're born, but like probably about 7 to 14 days later, depending on their progress, they're already nibbling on the grass. And then, within 3 weeks, you're usually starting to see, that they're eating a decent amount of it. And it starts them off so much quicker, and getting them used to their environment, which is, hey, you're here to eat grass, not to eat grain. We don't want pigs that eat too much grain. We really want pigs that can take grass and sweet potatoes and turn them into a healthy body. And that's what we're asking them to, eat what's here and not always be waiting for the grain. And some certain animals will inevitably just be pretty much addicted to grain. They won't go forage for themselves. They'll just wait until the grain comes, and then they get really nasty to have to battle out their siblings or their bunkmates for that grain. And in our system, we're really looking for the opposite. We're looking for pigs that just want to go plow up any part of their block, go find their own sweet potatoes. And there's really no way that a bully pig can dominate that system. And they've all got plenty to eat. They're all stress free. And then by the time they get to the end of that block, when they can't find any more sweet potatoes, there's a brand new block right next to them. So every 5 to 7 days, you're just moving them forward. Our largest challenges with the livestock has got to be scaling. It's really something that we don't want to and we don't want to go too big at one time. We don't want to go too big too quickly. Scaling's got to match, the fertility. It's got to match the planting. It's got to match the marketing. So if you don't have all those kind of lined up and you have one way out of whack, then the business might fail. The other large challenge is kind of switching gears. It's got to be the education of the consumer. And then also that has to do with the imported organic produce that we have to compete with. And it's just until that changes, we're going to always struggle to make the sale price for what we need to pay Americans what they need at the same time, a living wage. But you want to know what our struggles are. This is the one that drives most farmers out of business. This is the reason that most people can't make it, is because the money in for the product doesn't equal the money out for the labor. And those are sometimes too far apart to actually make them meet and have a business model be successful. One of the talking points was the adaptations in infrastructure. So I thought, what you really need to master here is electric fencing. And as simple as it seems, it actually requires some training in all your handlers of electrical theory, and even I put thermodynamics, because a lot of folks don't understand how electric travels or how it's conducted, how even how the system works. So you really just need to go over the general way that electric flows, and how if you know the basic principles of electricity, then you can troubleshoot the issues a lot faster. That's why you need to know it, because you can't have your fences down for too long. And then daily verification of the system is super important. Whatever you do, make sure there's somebody in charge of checking that system at a very minimum once per day, but we check it twice a day. So that's one of our chicken tractors right there. That's number 2 coop, and it's just a trailer. This is pretty typical of what folks are gonna do the first time. Egg boxes on the outside, trailer hitch. We really have tried to get away from a lot of the trailer units, because I hate to have wheels out there, and that's a typical thing in our soil. Is just, or it might be specific to our soil, is we have really a lot of clay and a lot of mud that gets into the tire seals and just ruins the seals on the tires. They go flat, and then you're always trying to fix tires out there, and it's not a good long-term solution. So we've gone to this kind of solution for like the shade structures and even the new chicken coops, where we just lift them up with a tractor. Now we'll come in there with a front end loader, and you can see right where the forks slide in on that shade structure, and we'll just pick it up and move it to the next paddock over. This one has even got wings on it that fold up if we need to get in between tight areas or not. But we've learned that we've pretty much never even used the wings up, so we started making them wider now. And that's just a pretty good like 2-inch tubing, I think, or 1 and some change, but I think it's 2-inch tubing that we used on that one. You need to learn to read your animals, and when they're done eating, when they're stressed. So that's how you ultimately know when to move your animals. But we find that both in the chickens and the pigs, it helps to set them up in kind of long rectangles, like a lengthwise rectangle, and then you will divide it up into different movements. That they'll have smaller paddocks with a divider, usually just a hot wire, or in the chickens it would just be another piece of fence, and it'll keep them in smaller paddocks, and you'll move them forward every 5 to 7 days approximately. And that's just based on when they get done with that paddock. That paddock might be like 1/8 of an acre, it might be 1/10 of an acre, it might be 1/12 of an acre, somewhere in that range we're probably talking about for most paddocks. And then on the stocking density, we'll typically stock between a half a dozen to a dozen pigs on that stocking density. Might be more on like the 1/5 of an acre to 1/4 acre on like if you have up to 12 pigs in there. But but we'll shrink it down to probably 1/8 of an acre or less for 5 to 6, 7 pigs in there. And with the chickens, we're probably close to 1/4 acre for like 150 birds or so in there, or maybe a little bit more, and that's not that often. So usually it's probably more around like 1/10 of an acre, 1/8 of an acre for about I would say 60 to 100 birds, somewhere in that range of egg-laying birds. So that's our stocking density in general. And then it varies, but you're basically just seeing when are they done eating and are they stressed. Chickens will show stress by pecking. Pigs will show stress by how they look at you and the body condition, their body mass index, and how they conduct themselves. So it's just important to learn those different cues and different communication that their animals are giving you, and how to train that too on the folks who are really doing the primary daily goals, daily tasks for the animals. So here's the breakdown. I did some research here for the 2022 to see kind of crop categories for you guys to understand where our farm stands. And there's a lot, there's a lot of cool information here. And I had to put together different kinds of crops to kind of look at it in a more of a broad view, because we do so many different things in some of these categories, like radishes and turnips. There's probably 30 different crops in there, or different product types, not necessarily varieties, but there's a lot. Tree fruit too, there's a lot of different varieties and stuff out there. But it does show that we're a pretty well-rounded farm. But at the end of the day, we're a greens farm. I mean, like, out of all of our crops, the greens are they're the consistent crop throughout the entire year. So we have to be kind of innovative in how we keep producing a lot of greens, because greens are like probably the most competitive part of what we do too. And as you go down the list, it's almost less competitive, for the lower value ones, but they're not even lower value. If you look at it, it's like that's churning. You can see it's a good part of what we do. It's actually pretty surprising how well-rounded it ends up being over the year, especially if depends on how you break down greens. But even then, there's a lot of diversity in the greens product category. But I think something to think about is how all of this scales, and how your pork and how the eggs, they really can't get to be too much of a proportion of this, because it all kind of balances with the rest of it. So they probably have, they could probably triple or quadruple in size of like what we're actually doing right now to make it optimized, but it couldn't go like 10 or 20 times the amount of pork and eggs on that same amount of land that produces the other ones. So something to think about. Like, I think as people are looking at one way or another, like, I'm going to be a pig farmer or I'm going to be a chicken farmer, it's, well, that's 1/8 of what you do, or 1/12 of what you do, or something like that. And then you kind of build all the rest of it based on what grows really well in your area, and what resources do you have already available, rather than trying to bring in too much of the resources that will end up driving you out of business. If you depend too much on other resources, then eventually when the prices of those change, your business model will have to change really rapidly, or else you don't stay in business.
Thanks so much to John Bitter for sharing his story with us. Find more on crop livestock integration at www.ofrf.org.